Israel's offensive in Lebanon. And in the midst of all this, entire Middle East continues to remain on the boil after Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah's killing. Republic TV senior executive editor Abhishek Kapoor spoke exclusively to former U.S. envoy to the UN John Bolton, who explains how eliminating Nasrallah is a significant victory for the Israeli Defense Forces. Listen in to this detailed and exclusive conversation here on Republic.
Well, good morning, friends. Mr. John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor of the United States, joins us on this conversation on tension building up, escalation building up in the Middle East with the elimination of Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah by Israel in an airstrike that happened on Friday. Very good morning to you, sir, Mr. Bolton. And let me begin by asking, what's your sense of the kind of escalation that's building up in the Middle East after elimination of Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah by Israel?
Well, I think the Israelis have scored a very significant victory, obviously, by eliminating not only Nasrallah, but many other top Hezbollah leaders, and now appear to be preparing an attack across the border into Lebanon in order to prevent Hezbollah forces from being able to rocket northern Israel. The big unknown question at this stage is whether Israel will go after Hezbollah's enormous stockpile of missiles, estimated by many, including the CIA, as Hezbollah having as many as 150,000 missiles, which is an enormous threat to Israel and others in the region. So we don't know what decision Israel has made, if they've made any decision on that. But I think the next phase looks like it'll be a ground operation, possibly combined with going after the missiles.
So in a way, Mr. Bolton, you are saying that far from de-escalation, we could see more intense military activity taking place between Israel and Lebanon, and in fact there is widening of the conflict with Israel targeting the Houthis also in Yemen.
Right. Well, I think increased military activity is entirely possible. I don't consider that escalation, because I think what's been going on almost for a year now, since October the 7th last year, when Hamas attacked Israel, is a war of Iran against Israel, fighting through its terrorist proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, as you mentioned, the Shia militia groups in Iraq and Syria, and Iran's own conventional forces. I don't think it's going well for Iran. They may well regret it, but at this point, having launched the Ring of Fire strategy, Israel is taking advantage of it. They've inflicted enormous damage on Hamas, considerable damage on Hezbollah, with more to be done.
Mr. Bolton, also with your vantage, having been at the top of the national security establishment there earlier, you think Iran has any capability now to respond militarily in any manner to Israel's actions?
Well, I think as Iran demonstrated back in April, when they fired, by Israeli count, 320 drones and missiles against Israel, they can do it. Now, that attack was not successful, but Iran has a very large capability in intermediate range ballistic missiles, and they're very, very close to having a nuclear weapons capability too. We don't know exactly where it stands. So from Israel's point of view, they're very worried about a nuclear holocaust, as they describe it. But I think Iran is even more nervous, because I don't think they believe that this time Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government will be intimidated by the Biden administration. If they strike Israel, or Hezbollah does, I think this time Israel could go after very big targets in Iran, perhaps including the Iranian nuclear program.
In that case, you think the United States, what would be the U.S. position? Would the United States be backing Israel?
Well, I don't think the United States would be involved in it directly, but I do think that the Biden White House, notwithstanding its differences with Israel at the moment, is probably telling Iran right now, do not attack Israel proper again. And because I think the White House knows what the Israeli reaction would be. I don't think Israel wants to undertake a strike against Iran, though, until the Hezbollah missile threat is resolved.
Right. So you mean to say it's happening step by step. Mr. Bolton, you were part of the team that sort of oversaw the rollout of Abraham Accords, and you mentioned the Houthis and the Hezbollah and the Shia militias. In effect, then, isn't the Middle East problem essentially an Iran problem and hence a Shia problem, or a Shia problem and hence an Iran problem, and not a wider, Islamic nations versus Israel problem, really?
Right. Well, I had resigned by the time of the Abraham Accords, but I think they reflect that the reality in the Middle East, the underlying reality, is that the Gulf Arab states and many others on the Sunni side of the divide within Islam view Iran as the principal threat to peace and security in the region. So in that sense, their view strategically is exactly the same as Israel's. And I think that was the groundwork for the Abraham Accords. And I think more are coming. I think the Saudis would like to have full diplomatic relations with Israel as well, but cannot under the present circumstances. So the risk is that if the risk of a wider war is that Iran, knowing they can't intimidate Israel, may try and intimidate the Saudis or the United Arab Emirates by attacking or threatening to attack positions in those countries. But this is, as you say, this is not a war of all of Islam against Israel. This is a conflict posed by the Iranian regime's efforts to get hegemony within Islam and hegemony within the geographic Middle East, and that the Arab states will firmly oppose.
Mr. Bolton, then as a corollary, can we say that if Israel goes into southern Lebanon with a ground offensive, or even targets some sites in Iran of military nature, Middle East still won't see a wider military conflict, in the sense that it's not going to be an all-out war?
I don't think it will happen. If Iran took steps to make it a much broader war, I think they'd be facing real destruction, because I think the Israelis at that point would not only go after the nuclear program, they'd go after their oil facilities, they'd go after military installations. And I think the Arab states of the Gulf would take their part in it too. They're not going to sit by this time and let the Houthis fire rockets or drones against their oil infrastructure or their civil airports, as the Houthis have done in the past. The aid that Iran gives the Houthis is in the backyard, in effect, of the Arab states on the Arabian Peninsula. And they've been very restrained in the recent past, but I don't think they would hold back if they felt they were again threatened, both across the Gulf by Iran and in their rear from the Houthis.
And it needed Israel to really target some of the military infrastructure of the Houthis, Mr. Bolton. The Americans did not, other allies did not. Why so?
Well, I think it was a mistake by the United States and others. The principle of freedom of the seas has been critical for the United States before it was a country, when we were just 13 little colonies across the Atlantic Ocean. And the Houthis wouldn't have two rocks to rub together if they weren't supplied and armed by Iran. And this closure of the Suez Canal Red Sea passage has had an enormous impact, negative impact, I'm sure, on many economies, including India. The only ships that get through are Russian and Chinese ships and others that Iran favors. So this is an interference in freedom of seas that's just flatly unacceptable. Forget Israel, forget these other aspects of the conflict. That alone should have been eliminated long ago.
Yeah, Mr. Bolton, since you just mentioned about the Iranian, Russian, and Chinese axis, in fact, as we speak, Russian Prime Minister Mishustin is in Tehran, and it seems that Russia is very clear that they need to be seen on the side of Iran. You think that can fuel the conflict further in any manner?
Well, I think what we have is really an axis forming between China and Russia, with outliers like North Korea, like Iran, Syria, Belarus, Cuba, Nicaragua. And it poses, I think, a very real difficulty for the United States and the West as a whole. I think it poses a very real difficulty for India. Given the historic relationship with Russia, it's now partnering increasingly with China, which is the single biggest threat that India faces. So I think it means some hard decisions ahead all the way around. And this support for Iran is utterly unjustified by any real Chinese or Russian interest. The Chinese want to buy oil from Iran, they want to buy oil from Russia, but it's no excuse for propping up a regime, the regime of the Ayatollahs, that threatens everybody else in the region.
All right, I'm sort of winding down my question. Going back to the Abraham Accords that we discussed, Mr. Bolton, you think that the reason October 7 Hamas attack happened was that somebody wanted to offset the possibility of Saudi Arabia and Israel establishing proper diplomatic relations?
Well, I think the timing indicates that may well have been a factor. We won't know for some time, I think, but it could also mean simply that all of the preparations that Iran had been making by supplying and equipping and training and financing its terrorist proxies had finally reached the moment when they thought that actually unleashing the Ring of Fire strategy made sense. It's not going well for Iran, as we've discussed, but I do think you can't understand these as separate, unconnected conflicts. This is part of a broader pattern. It is a broader war, not of Palestinians against Israel, but of Iran against Israel.
And Mr. Bolton, you think United States is in a position to influence the events as they go forward in terms of de-escalation, in terms of making sure that it does not become a wider conflict? How much influence does the United States have on those events going into the future?
Well, I think at this point, very, very little influence on Israel. They've been told to have a ceasefire with Hamas. They've been told to have a ceasefire with Hezbollah. Obviously, the Israelis have made a decision. They don't want to live in a neighborhood where they're constantly threatened by terrorists. And we wouldn't want to do that either. I think this time they're determined to finish it and to try and live in peace going forward. If you have a ceasefire at this point, you're simply perpetuating the conflict.
I believe some in the DC establishment would be really annoyed at the way the Israelis have conducted themselves, given the fact that the bomb, for example, the 2,000-pound bomb that was used to eliminate Hassan Nasrallah, that was the bomb the Biden administration wanted to deny to Israel.
Right, but ultimately they did ship the 2,000-pound bombs. And, you know, when you detonate a 2,000-pound bomb inside a building, inside a construction like that, it doesn't have the same blast effect that it does if you drop it on an open field. And in fact, you can see from the before and after pictures of the Israeli bombing that it destroyed the building, and buildings next door were not badly damaged. This is to the extent civilians were endangered. That's a war crime committed by Hezbollah by using innocent civilians as human shields. The terrorists don't get a veto over somebody's right of self-defense by endangering their own people.
All right, Mr. Bolton, my last question to you. With the almost entire Hamas leadership eliminated, almost entire Hezbollah leadership eliminated, you think Middle East is most amenable to peace in the recent past today than any time that we have seen?
Well, I think the Israelis want to go further. You know, in some wars, you're not going to get peace until the enemy is thoroughly defeated. And Hamas, you know, the commander, Yahya Sinwar, is still underground in Gaza somewhere. He still has Israeli hostages. And while Hezbollah's leadership has been decimated already, they've appointed a new leader. So others will step into their places. And I think the main issue remaining is, will Israel go after that huge Hezbollah missile arsenal?
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Bolton, with those deep insights and perspective on the ongoing Middle East conflict. Of course, the sense we get after this conversation is that not anytime soon we are going to see de-escalation. That's how it is. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.